it was just pain, dude. Like you're motivated by pain.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're motivated by pain, you don't really think about all the intricacies. You don't think about the details. You just think about how do I get to that end goal, right? So what spurred it all for me was just that pain principle from the get-go. And it's like, okay, I have this goal and I'm very, I'm in a very vulnerable place. I feel helpless as a child. I just got to make this happen. So I started reading Men's Health and whatever the case may be. And I reached that goal. And that taught me that, from that very early age, that if you want something, sometimes you're going to be motivated more so by pain than you are by pleasure.
Hey, what's up, man? Good to see you.
Good to see you again. Good to see you again. It's a good thing we got everything rolling.
Yeah. Yeah. So had fun being on your podcast about a month ago. We spoke about a lot of fun things. We have a lot in common: husbands, fathers, podcasters for men. So there's a bunch of things I want to speak to you about, riffing off of what we spoke about last time. Also, one of the big subjects you cover on your podcast that I don't. But first, tell us about your background, because I actually don't know your story. How did you get into this?
Well, I mean, when it comes to the podcasting side of things, like legit, because I've been into like the male enhancement side of things, right? I've been trying to figure that out. I mean, I started this journey probably about 12 years ago. Before that, it's always been about physical health, men's health. Like I've always been really drawn to that. And, I stumbled across male enhancement just because I'm like, what? This is true? Like, this isn't bullshit. So I started to like go down that rabbit hole. And I was like, I just want to find a podcast that talks about this, right? And that's kind of what led me to start the podcast. I was talking about more about like, men's health, sexual health, male enhancement, all those things kind of tied in, right? And then the more I started to dig into it, the more I started to like find that, there is like legit truth to it. And there's more and more people that are like starting to open up to it, right? And a lot of like different urologists are now like coming on talking to me, like there's just so many different modalities and so many different things that we don't necessarily think about sometimes when it comes to like male enhancement, sexual health, erectile difficulties. And then it's kind of interesting because the more you start to dig into it, the more you see how many other things kind of are relevant in regards to, sexual health and how many things are affecting you in ways that you don't expect, right? It's kind of like, oh, I'm drinking from a plastic can, right? It should be completely fine, right? Until you realize you're like, wait a minute, some of these things might disrupt my hormonal levels, right? And you talk about BPAs, BPCs, PUFAs, all these different things that are affecting young men particularly. Like there was another study that I found recently about how the amount of microplastics that we find in babies now is due to the fact that they've been contaminated via the umbilical cord, via the mom, because of all the toxins that are in our environment, right? So it's interesting because, it started with one thing where I'm just like, I want to optimize myself to like, holy shit, we are living in pollution. We are living in a very toxic environment. And more than anything, it's like, what can I do to make sure that my two kids can live in a place that's better? Or at the very least, make it better for them in the environment that they're growing up in, right? So, I as a father also see it as like, okay, what can I do to make it better for them? And then more than anything, just kind of sharing this knowledge, because the more I think about death, man, the more I realize I'm like, what good is it to just hoard all the knowledge for yourself? I want to share that, have conversations, just keep learning, man, because the older I get, the more I realize, man, I sure am kind of dumb when it comes to a lot of things, or I sure am ignorant, right? And even though you may be well versed in a subject, over time you just start to realize, like, bro, I know nothing. Like, it's like there's so much more to learn, and that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. And that's the whole focus of the podcast, is just for everybody to learn more about how to live a better life. And as men, like what that really means, the masculine archetype, like what does that actually mean to be a good man? What does it mean to actually live healthy? What does it mean to have your money right? Like all these different things play into us having the best lives as men. So it started more with like the male enhancement, erectile difficulty side of things. And now it's just kind of overall like encompassing every aspect of manhood, right? So, and that's kind of why I called it Masculine Health Solutions, because I'm like, I'm looking for solutions. I'm not really looking for Band-Aids anymore, man. I'm like, yo, tell me the truth. I'm not looking for, let's treat disease. I'm like, no, like, how do we actually heal disease? How do we actually fix things, right? So that's the whole approach, and that's the whole purpose of, why I made the podcast and why it's where it's at today. It kind of evolved, so, and that just came from trying to explore these different subjects, man.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, when I found out about the plastics thing and how like me consuming microplastics affects my sperm, which will maybe affect how my son develops in utero. Like I went on this like rampage. I threw out my wife's favorite thermos. Like, she's still mad about that. I threw out all the plastic in our house. Like, I kind of went nuts for a little bit. But it's interesting because you entered kind of holistic personal development through male enhancement. And for anyone who doesn't know, we're talking about penis enlargement.
Yeah.
Right. I'll be perfectly honest, right? Because you and I have a lot in common. There's a lot of things we want to talk about. I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about it because I don't talk about sex directly. You know, it's kind of easy to make fun of the subject or like, but then honestly, I was thinking about it, right? Because I want to talk to you no matter what. And I was thinking like, it's actually tied to maybe the most universal male insecurity, unless you're like born naturally endowed. And I was actually thinking about this more because I don't know if I mentioned to you last time we spoke, but I'm putting out a book. It's a story of my journey from being very insecure to getting my mojo, so to speak. And I have this awesome literary agent. Her name is Jen. Shout out to Jen in case you listen. But she's a woman, right? So she's going through my book, and I didn't realize it, but there's a lot of things when it comes to male insecurities that she just didn't understand. Like, women don't understand. Like, men understand it when they read about like, oh yeah, I was insecure. I didn't get dates. Insecure about my size, whatever the thing is. But then I thought about it deeper. It's like, this is actually tied to maybe one of the most universal male insecurities. It's a lot deeper than that. In our culture, when guys talk about sex, it's usually in like a bro-y, not vulnerable way, which is why it's easy to make fun of it or be like, oh, you're talking about making your dick bigger, haha. But it's actually tied to something deeper. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what made it like actually this important to devote time into
pain right off the hop. Like, people like, and I know you're well versed like when it comes to psychology and obviously like, understanding human nature. The two things that motivate us, whether male or female, it's pain or pleasure. Simple. Like, for me, when I was a kid, like, and I think that's where it all started off, was like where I developed this mindset. Like, when I was a kid, I was obviously I was getting my ass kicked all the time, like every day, and suffering from that trauma. So immediately as a child, I recognized like, if I want to, stop this from happening, stop this abuse, what do I got to do? Right. So I linked up, if you get big and strong, nobody's going to fuck with you. Right. So I was probably around like 5 or 6 when I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I didn't know about manifestation or anything. And I'm just like, okay, 6 foot, 220. That's the goal. Right. By the time I was like 15, I hit that, and I was like, it wasn't something that was, like, it wasn't like a goal. Like, oh, I want to be big and muscular for aesthetic purposes or anything. It was just pain, dude. Like, you're motivated by pain. And when you're motivated by pain, you don't really think about all the intricacies. You don't think about the details. You just think about, how do I get to that end goal, right? So what spurred it all for me was just that pain principle from the get-go. And it's like, okay, I have this goal and I'm very, I'm in a very vulnerable place. I feel helpless as a child. I just got to make this happen. So I started reading Men's Health and whatever the case may be. And I reached that goal. And that taught me that, from that very early age, that if you want something, sometimes, regardless of whatever the goal is, you're going to be motivated more so by pain than you are by pleasure. Because if I was to work really hard to, get tons of money, that really didn't motivate me as much as the pain of like feeling those negative emotions inside of me as a child, feeling helpless, feeling vulnerable, feeling all that, right? Anyways, fast forward.
And I do want to say, like, I think both, I'll say women, most women, and any guy who didn't experience something like that. Again, it's very easy to make fun of the meathead or someone who's like really interested in building his body. Why do you care so much? Why are you watching UFC? Why do you watch like guys running into each other at full speed on Sundays? Like, but there's something so primal and ultimately vulnerable, even though men don't talk about it, about like what's really underneath. It's like, there is nothing more shattering to be physically dominant. Or maybe there's a couple of things which maybe you're about to get to, but like these kinds of things that like seems like they're all about, ego, men just want to be seem badass. There's a reason for it. And it comes back to like our inner child.
100%. And that's, bro, man. And it's kind of, we'll get into that later too, I guess. But the thing is, so going back to that same principle, right, where you feel kind of not worthless, because I was older at the time, and my wife kind of made like an offhanded comment. I'm just like, really? Okay. I'm gonna fix this, because I'm like, if this is an issue, I'm gonna see if I can work on this. And so later on, I came from that same place of like pain, and it motivated me, spurred me down this journey like 14 years ago, where I started like, I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna buy I spent way too much money on these pills that I got scammed on, right? Because the pills don't work. Like all it really has is like L-citrulline and
Yeah.
maybe some other stuff that you just kind of take that
And
helps
just so
with blood
people
flow.
can follow, because we're kind of speaking in euphemisms, she made a comment about your size in some
Oh
way.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And even though it was just kind of like as a joke, kind of, I took it personally, right? And I'm like, okay, well, fuck this. I'm gonna find a way to fix this, right? So I bought the extender and I looked into it, and apparently there was research behind it, and the research came with the pills, or not the research came with the pills. The extender came with the pills, right? Pills didn't do anything. I wasted $500 or $600, man. I wasted way too much money on it. The extender was absolute garbage, right? It was also really shitty, but it opened basically the door to the fact that there was some truth behind it. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to explore more of the truth behind like the manual stretching. What is gelking? And that's when I discovered this like JP's 90-day program, and I stuck with it. And when I first started, I was pretty consistent, right? And I made gains in that regard. And then when I made the gains, I was like, yeah, I'm killing it. I felt, you feel confident, you feel more happy with who you are. And it's one of those things that just kind of, I think as men too, it's like the accomplishment factor of like the gratification of I went out and I did something. But then I was also seeking the validation of my wife now, like, look at me, look how awesome I am. And to be 100% like honest, she didn't really care. Like she
Yeah.
didn't. And
It's kind of funny. A lot of the things that are kind of aimed at validation for women actually gets validation from men. Like most
Yeah.
of the way most guys work out to impress men, not women. Like they could have stopped at the gym a long time ago and women would be like, I think you're attractive. But you keep like, what's the next thing I can lift to make my bros think I'm better, basically.
Dude, 100%. And that's the same mindset that I had. And then it was funny because I made all these length gains, right? And I was like, yo, man, are you not impressed? Like, I felt like Maximus Aurelius in the Colosseum. I'm like, bro, I'm greatness. And she, like, legit did not care. I gained half an inch in girth, and she was like, do more of that. And that's when I discovered, I'm like, wait a minute. And obviously that led me more into understanding like the sexual side of things from a female perspective. Is like, hey, girth matters more than length, right? Where it's the first 3 inches of the inner wall of the vagina that are most receptive to everything. So I'm like, why am I I'm like, what? Like this whole time I felt like I was lied to. But then I kind of went back to the fact like, wait a minute, you were doing this more for your own ego versus you weren't really doing it so much for her. It was more like the validation factor, right? And I think most men, for the most part, and then going back to the whole bodybuilding side of things, like at the end of it, it just becomes a dick measuring contest, which is obviously an analogy that we always use,
Literally,
but it's
yeah.
100% true. And like even on some of these forums that I would frequent all the time to just kind of get my information, it was the same deal. Like guys are just fighting over like, oh, well, that doesn't count because of XYZ, or I'm bigger than you, blah, blah, blah. And my information was more valid. I'm like, I'm not going to say it was toxic because there was a lot of great guys on there that would discuss their gains, how they went about it. But it almost did seem like it was just like a nonstop dick measuring contest like you see at the gym, or in a bodybuilding competition. And when it comes to bodybuilding too, and I compete naturally, so we're not looking nowhere near as big as some of the freaks you see at the Mr. Olympia. But when it comes to bodybuilding, like females aren't into that. Most women are into like, oh wow, this guy's gargantuan. Like most chicks don't want Ronnie Coleman. Most chicks just don't. They're like, I don't want a dude that's like 300 pounds of muscle. Again, that just kind of goes back to the whole male side of things where we are driven by ego and we are driven by the extremes too, which is something that Jordan Peterson talks about, right? Like you'll see men at the far end of either side of the spectrum, right? And women are kind of like in between it and more in the safe realm, but guys are just going to push it to the absolute limit or to the absolute worst. So it's one of those things that just kind of exists. And I think it's a concept that just pertains to men where you're right. Like your editor, she might not understand, like, why would that make you feel insecure in that way? But I think it just has to do with the male paradigm, I guess, in our modern society.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of in biology, there's Bateman's principle, which people quote as sperm is cheap, eggs are expensive, which is why you
There's only
see
one egg.
yeah, which is like all women are valuable in that regard because every egg is like this scarce resource. But so in a sense, in the dating pool or a mating game, however you want to put it, like all women have an inherent worth. Whereas if you're in the bottom 20% of men, you're getting nothing. Like the bottom 20% of any mammal the males don't mate. And then top 20% or top 10% or like whatever the Tinder stats are these days, the top 2% get almost everyone, right?
Yeah.
So it is true. I think that is why men are motivated by the extremes because you want to be in the top 2%. Even if it means you go so extreme that women don't like you anymore, you still want to do it, right? It's just like in our wiring.
But you know what the thing is too, is that in that extreme that we may see as like, oh, you're not even attracting women or whatever, there's going to be some women that are going to be attracted to that. And you're still going to find a mate because you are an outlier and you stick out, right? And I think maybe that's why men will push themselves to that extreme. It's kind of like, if you go from a multimillionaire to a multi-billionaire, it's kind of like, it's almost that same frame of reference in that you don't really need it anymore. It's like the woman would have been happy at the millionaire status. It's, you already got a certain amount of muscle on your body. It's like when you push it even further though, it's like now you've impressed everybody and now there's going to be the female that just kind of flock to you, right? Versus, the guys that, I don't want to say the incels, but the guys at the lower end of, or the opposite side of the spectrum who just haven't gotten off the couch and they're living at mom's house, right? It's almost like, I kind of feel like we're so scared, or not scared, but it's like you need to push yourself further all the time. But when you keep leveling up like that, it's like, does it really matter anymore? Like what's like 100 million to $1 billion? Like it doesn't really matter so much. Or what's like the biggest bodybuilder to like a 300-pound body? Like it isn't really like, it's not really relevant to the dating pool anymore. It's like, you already won, dog. It's like that Kevin Hart joke where he's talking about the bodybuilder. It's like, why are you still here, man? You won. Go home. So I don't know if it's an attractiveness thing or it's just kind of something that we're wired to have.
I think so. And I think we talked about this on your show. It's like part of what's new about modern life is that we're exposed to everyone. Like if you were kind of muscly in a Paleolithic tribe, you're immediately number one, right? Yeah. But now you're comparing yourself, like, Ronnie Coleman is somewhere in the world. What was it? Chris Bumstead is somewhere, and you're gonna feel small just seeing his picture. So you're never gonna be good enough. And honestly, women have this version too, and this was like the narrative in the '90s with like unattainable figures on the covers of magazines. But like, it's now true, aesthetic, like purely on looks and like completely superficial things, as true for men, maybe more true now.
Yeah, and I mean, like I was looking into that when it comes to the social media side of things. Like I was learning more about how it affects young women more than men. Because when it comes to young women, like, I mean, when it comes to beauty, it does way more than it does for men. Like for men, if like my wife and I were talking about this too, it's like if a dude is able to provide, is a good guy, for the most part, a lot of women will see that as a win. Right? It's like, well, his bank account is decent. He's a good dude. He can provide. He's there.
Makes
He's
her laugh.
Good father. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's almost that survival factor. But for a young girl coming up, it's almost like if she's not beautiful, she's already compared to all the other beautiful women on social media. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to invest in that BBL or whatever the case may be. And they start disfiguring their body. And it's interesting because obviously it's affecting young men too. But I think when it comes to young women coming up, the depression, the anxiety, like I didn't even know that was a real thing. But I see what's going on like on TikTok, Instagram, and these young girls have to compare themselves to fully grown women that have invested like more than 50 grand into having the fake tits, the ass, all that, the stomach done. And they think it's all natural and attainable, but then they, get into their teenage years and they're like, oh, I'll never be beautiful. And that's actually a contributing factor into depression, anxiety in young girls. And I'm like,
you have a son and a daughter? Or
no, I got two boys.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I have a daughter, so I think about this a lot as well. And I think part of it is not just the aesthetics, but Instagram, OnlyFans, obviously, is the extreme. Young women get so much validation from sexualizing themselves, not just looking good, but also putting it out there, flaunting it. They could even get paid for it. They could even make money for it. They're also now comparing themselves to all the porn stars in the world. But then I'm seeing this amongst like women closer to my age, realizing that path gets you all this validation, but it doesn't make any man want to be with you. Like it'll give you all of these, men will line up to sleep with you, but they're not going to want to date you. And that's kind of like the hard crashing truth that I think women who go down that road will eventually find out, which I think is one thing that men don't experience the same.
No, well, the thing is, and I mean, I've heard Andrew Tate and other people talk about this too, and that, men are wired to be different and we're supposed to be out there on the hunt and all that. And I mean, to a degree, that's kind of true. But at the same time, like any woman that respects herself isn't going to want to be with some player because she's like, well, what's the point? You're no good for me in a family relationship kind of or dynamic, right? And I kind of think to myself, the older I get as well, because, when you're a kid, I remember in my 20s where it's all about, yo, man, you got to be the player. You got to pick up all the chicks. And that also validates you with you and your homies, you and your bros are just like, yeah, he's the guy that gets the girls. But then you get older and you realize, man, that's all bullshit. Like it's such a load of shit, like all of it, right? And the older you get, you're just like, you know what? It's a lot better to just be a conservative man, have one woman, not worry about all this bullshit they tell you about on social media about like chasing all this glitzy, like that lifestyle that I see a lot of people that try to portray this false narrative on social media. Like to me, and I know you're 35 as well. You look at it, you're just like, bruh, like that does not impress me anymore. There was a time when I was a kid, and the people you're marketing to that are in their, 16, 15, they're probably impressed by that. Like, oh, he's got a Lamborghini. I'm like, that's fine. Does he have peace? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is he able to sleep with his head, just completely relaxed at night and, clear his mind of all the garbage and the stress? Or is he just thinking about the next superficial fancy thing he can get to impress the world? And that's where that external validation for me plays into whether you're going to be happy as a man or not. And that's the older I get, the more I'm just like, yo, man, the things that make me happy in life is like me sleep in my bed and my kids roll up and my wife is there and we're telling jokes amongst each other. Like that's something I'm going to remember on my deathbed. That's going to make me happy. But taking a bunch of pictures on social media with me and my Lamborghini trying to impress people that I don't even know, like the older you get, the more you realize like it's all false, right? And that doesn't
Yeah.
even serve to be like a good husband either if you want to have that in the future as a man as well. Because the way I see it, like the OnlyFans models and these glitzy Lamborghini Andrew Tate kind of personas, they attract each other, right? Because they're kind of built for each other. It's like you guys both actually want that conservative, lifestyle at the end of the day, like the male or the man, being the husband, female, the kids. And the older you get, you start to realize that. But I think a lot of people like think that right now that they're in their 20s or maybe even early 30s, which is kind of sad if you're at that point, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You still haven't figured it out. But it's almost like you will attract each other because the OnlyFans chick and the guy with the Lamborghini, it's like, what are they chasing? Material things. So they have something in common, right? They're all after the Louis Vuitton and whatever. But at the end of the day, are they happy? That's the question I ask myself. And I
Yeah.
hope they can find
Well,
happiness, but
maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I think it's, like in economics, they call it it's a tournament. Like 100 people enter, only one person wins, 99 people lose. And when I see like young people following the Andrew Tate model, which I think on some level it's normal. It's like men want to get to the top 1%. It used to be the top 1% of 100 guys. Now it's, 3 billion men you're competing with. So it's a little different. But, most people who pursue the Andrew Tate model are not going to get there. They won't.
No.
And if they stick with it too long, they're going to get a sucker's payoff. And
Yeah.
and the thing is, like, it's easy to to label the value of the Lamborghini or the Louis Vuitton bag or X number of women, but it's kind of hard. Like the moment you're describing with your kids rolling up, it's kind of hard to be like, look at how awesome this is and capture it and show it to the world, because it's an accessible feeling that's amazing. But it's kind of like with feminism, like feminism really downplayed the value of motherhood because it's not so-called special to be a mother in a consumerist world, because like there's only a few female CEOs where every woman could be a mother. But I would argue for almost all women, it's way more fulfilling. Like nature gave us like the exact playbook to achieve fulfillment, and it's not that hard. You don't have to be the 1% person necessarily.
No, yeah. And the thing is, I mean, for me, this gets into the conspiratorial side of things where I do believe that they're trying to ruin the old school nuclear family, and they keep trying to like, blur the lines as to what reality should be or how humans should interact, and that we should basically follow or like do away with those old school models because they're archaic and they don't work and they're dumb. You want this new age, blah, 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 whatever it is that they're selling young kids these days. But to me, I don't think it's that complicated. Like the simplicity of the fact that if you are a father and you're there to play with your kids, you're there to provide and you're happy. It's like at the end of the day, you will have a more fulfilling life than a guy that has all the money in the world, but is lonely at the end of the day. Like I couldn't imagine, like for me, I wouldn't view it as a curse per se, but if I was rich and I didn't have my family, then, I'd be kind of sad when I think about it. Right. Cause I'm like, I would rather have the time that I have with my family in this lifetime and just cherish that, right? And I get it. Like, there's a lot of men that are single and they've been successful, and that's fine, right? But for me, the way I kind of see it is that old traditional role, like, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's something beautiful that I think every man should experience in this life. If you can be a father, I think you should go for it. Father, husband. It's an old school role, I guess, and it's something that we don't celebrate as often as we should. But there's nothing more gratifying for a man in this lifetime, man, is to provide and take care of these people. Like, it's your job to be the protector, provider. And I think those are the pillars of masculinity that sometimes get overlooked. I do believe in progress, though, right? It's kind of like those are my three pillars that I go to. Is like provide, protect, and progress. It's your job to obviously provide as a man, make sure everybody's taken care of, right? Protect. I mean, if you can't fight and your family's like, yo, you got to do something, like grow a set of balls. So that's where I think that like physical development side of things, like I saw your post too on like why every man should fight too. And it's kind of like that primal expression should be there, because if not, I think a lot of men will internalize that and it'll turn into something negative. So I'm like, yo, find some outlet that you can have where you can develop yourself physically. I think it's a must. I got two boys. I got to take them outside and run around like dogs, because if not, that pent up masculine energy needs to be let go into the world. Right. And the other one is progress. Like, what are you doing to progress as a man every single day for the rest of your life? You should have something that you're working on. I think that's a thing that might be missing amongst a lot of guys, that they don't really have that purpose either, and they don't really know what they should be working on. I think the first place you should work on as a man is obviously your mindset, but you should also start with like the simplest things that are out there as well. Like, just go to the gym, like develop yourself physically in some regard, and you'll find how gratifying, how that, like everything that you can take away from, like, let's say you take a Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you learn the concepts, you learn how difficult it is, you conquer that. Now you can take those concepts of what you learned that helped you to figure out, how to basically get to, I don't know, brown belt, black belt, whatever the case may be, and just keep leveling up. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, I could take this into business, right? I developed my business, and now it's like I got that mentality that I can take from what I learned in martial arts and take that and apply it to any other aspect of my life. And I think that as men, as young men, more than anything, it's like, forget all that lavish garbage. Do something challenging. Challenge yourself at, I don't know, from 18 to 25. Like, create a rite of passage for yourself and roll with that. And then just take those concepts into the real world, discover who you are, and then start working on yourself as a man and progress from there, right?
Yeah, and something I've thought about a lot is that all of this personal development stuff, like across the whole spectrum, it's really trying to get not even just men, like get people to become adults. It's like if you look at, I mean, it doesn't matter. Like you could look at the spiritual side of things, or more psychological or scientific. It's like it's all kind of drive us to be complete, or make up for your childhood wounds, whatever stuff, or inadequacies. And I've been thinking about this a lot for myself. It's like, where do I still act like a boy, or where do I still think like a boy? And like going back to something you said earlier, it's like at our age, at 35, biologically we'd be grandparents, and we'd probably be dead in a couple of years, right? Like we've already kind of overplayed our childhood experience, which is not to, obviously, I believe in personal development. I think is important, but to your point, like culture is kind of keeps us as kids longer, which is why I think a lot of people aren't having children anymore, because they still see, I know a lot of my friends who are my age and they're not sure if they want it or they don't. It's like, they still see themselves as kids, which is why it seems like a crazy idea to make a person, because they still feel like a child. And honestly, even as a father, I still realize like, oh, I still think like a boy in this way and this way.
Yeah.
And these are the places I need to work on.
100%, man. But to your point, I do feel that so many people like in our age group from like 35 to 40, like it's kind of weird, man. Like there's one dude that I'm thinking about in particular when he said that about how, like, he hasn't really grown up, and like I don't want to judge the guy, but he talks about how he would hate having kids. He doesn't want kids at all, and he takes like his Transformers lunchbox to work, right? And I remember I saw it. I'm like, what's up with that, right? Like I thought it was kind of odd. And then he told me, it's like, I'm going to Disney World. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm like, you taking your kids there? Because at the time I didn't know he had kids, right? And he's like, no, I'm just going there with my partner. And I'm like, the fuck? Like, why would you want to go there for fun? Like as I'm like, yo, man, like grown adult, you're just gonna go there. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, and again, it's one of those things that I'm like, I'm trying not to judge, but at the same time, immediately when this man told me that, and he's kind of immature too, the first thing that comes to my mind is just like, yo, you're like an overgrown man child. It's like you have outbursts every now and again. You're basically a child. Like, and it's weird to say, but so much of our society and a lot of people that we do see like from 30 to 45, I think just haven't grown up, man. And I think that that rite of passage is missing for a lot of people.
Hmm.
However, I think the one blessing that I had in my life is that I had my first son at 22, right? That made me grow up a lot faster. And sometimes I ask myself that all the time, like, if I hadn't had my kid, would I be just like this man? Would I have actually grown up? Or would my focal point, like in life and who I am as a man, would I even have developed that if I hadn't had my first son? Because I think like I had my kid at 22, right? I feel like it forces you to grow up. And to your
Hmm.
point, the old school man, he was having his kids around 20 because he was going to die in a couple of years. He's like, somebody's got to mind the fields, bro. I got
Uh-huh.
to have 10 of these guys. But I think that when you do have a child and you do have a family, it forces you to mature real quick. And for me, I kind of see it as my rite of passage, I guess, because it's like, bro, you had to figure things out on the fly. And it was difficult. Like, I'm not going to say it was easy. It was very hard. Coming up, it forces you to mature. Like, I know my brain wasn't even done developing until like you turn 25. So it forces you to grow up real quick. And I feel that because a lot of people aren't having kids, it's almost like that maturation that used to take place for the older generations from like the 70s 80s, like it just doesn't exist so much now because people are just like, you know what, I don't have that responsibility in my life and I'm just going to get a dog instead, which is fine if you do want to get a dog. But it's like I don't necessarily have to worry about anybody, like I don't have to sacrifice all that much, which means that I can live a comfortable life and I can just kind of keep going, on with my life playing Call of Duty. Maybe I have a girlfriend and I can just relax and take it easy. But when you have a kid, man, it makes you basically like you have to reconfigure every aspect of your life again. Cause it's like, it's not about you anymore, right? It's, you got other people that depend on you and going back to the whole like
Yeah.
providing part of it. If your job is to provide, well, you better, pull up your pants real quick and figure stuff out. Give your nuts a tug and get going because there's not a lot of time for you to just like, oh, I'm just going to meander around as I figure this out. It's like, no, you have to, grow up quick and start to figure things out because now there's people relying on you.
Yeah,
And that's why I think it's important.
I felt like kind of on a spiritual in a spiritual lens, like having a kid connected me to nature. And before I was kind of just floating around because without
Yeah.
like that kind of connection, like, so we don't have the tribe, we don't have a lot of things that we evolved to have. If you're not having children and you're in the consumerist culture where everything's about how much money can you get to buy stuff that would entertain you, it keeps you trapped in like, that's the way you think when you're a little kid where you don't have responsibilities and everything is about how much entertainment can I consume. And I mean, I'm trying not to be judgmental too, because a lot of my friends are just like what you described. It's
Yeah.
like, if you already kind of figured out your career, you're paying your bills and you don't have anyone to provide for, what do you do other than find new weird things to consume?
Yeah.
Like whether it's going to a theme park as a grown person or it's hard for me to say this without being judgmental, but like my friends who are foodies and they just want to try every restaurant and try every
Yeah.
weird thing. It's like you're only doing that because you have nothing to do with your time and energy, right?
Yeah.
Truthfully. And then when you have a kid, it's like, well, this is a harder thing. And I also understand though, to try to reduce my judgment, it's like the world is set up where it kind of punishes you. Like it must have been really hard. I don't know what your income was like at 22, but it must have been really hard
Oh, it
providing for a
sucks.
child.
Yeah.
It makes sense on your balance sheet. It makes sense. Don't have a kid now if I can help it because
Yeah.
I'll have more money in the bank and then I could buy more stuff. Like everything is stacked against being in line with nature.
100%. And it's kind of interesting too that you mentioned the nature side of things immediately. Like as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, it's weird too because all of a sudden it's like I understand why people want to go to the suburbs at that age. In my early 20s, I'm like, oh no, I want to be downtown. I want to be in the heat of things. Like where things are happening. And then you get older and you're just like, no, I'd rather be out like the bush, man. Like I'd rather be far away from people, just me and my little tribe out here, and enjoy as much of nature as I possibly can. But I do feel that the society that we live in right now is it's almost like it's catering to the fact that a lot of people like I learned about the DINK, recently about the dual income, no kids, right?
Okay.
And I'm like, yeah, no, for me, I was just like, yeah, first time I heard that acronym, I'm like, is this like a male enhancement thing? Like, what's going on, like a DINK?
Is this things
But
people are striving to be? Like,
yeah, well, it's one of these things. Like I forgot which. I was reading about it recently, but it's like a lot of young couples have just decided that we're going to be quote unquote dinks,
Dinks.
right? Yeah, and I'm like, even the name sounds horrible. I'm like, get a better acronym, but the dual income no kids, it's basically what a lot of people are striving, because what they do is they will look at their balance sheet and they'll say, okay, I make 100K, she makes 90K a year, so together we make 190. We get a mortgage on a big house or whatever, but we understand that we're not going to have kids, so we'll get a dog, and then everything kind of works around the fact that they are not going to have kids. And obviously, if they do that, yeah, you'll have a lot more money. But the thing is that I kind of always go back to is that after you have your kids, it's almost like your whole perspective changes. And for me, there's nothing better in this life than my children. Like I love every I love having my kids, and doing everything with them, doing everything for, well, not everything for them, but you do dedicate a lot of your life to basically providing as much information, time, energy, everything. Like you invest so much into them. But at the end of the day, like when I die, and I think about death a lot, I don't know why, like as of late. And I think there's just something magical about having children in your life. Like it almost teaches you like a new layer of love too. Because I do feel like that's something that might be missing in this culture of like, the dual income, no kids, and people that just don't have children. It's like they, I don't want to say like they're robbing themselves of the experience, but when you do have children, you will experience love that you can't describe for anybody, or that you just can't. It's almost like you have to feel it in order to know what that experience is really about.
Yeah.
And I think
And it's
that
not monetizable.
it's not.
Yeah.
Like you can't love a dog the same way you love a child. Like I'm sorry, like if my dog's crossing the road and he's about to get hit, I'd probably be like, oh no, he's dead. Which is awful. But if it was my kid, you best believe like I'm running out there. I'm like, all right, Lord, take the wheel. Like I'm about to die, but it's all good. It's a different layer of love that I don't think we can really fully comprehend. And I think when you do experience that love, it also almost, because it changes your perspective so much, it almost helps you understand, like, I think God a lot better. Because oftentimes you hear about in the Bible, like, God the Father, our creator, and the love that he has for us. And that's kind of where it makes me think, like, when you experience that level, you almost start to understand more of the metaphysical side of things, because you're like, okay, they say that God is love, and I love my child this much, but he loves me a million times more than that. Like, what does that even mean? Like, how does that concept, like, I can't even comprehend that fully from my human brain, right? But it just changes your perspective in life so much. And I don't know, it's one of those invaluable things that I think no matter what, I'm always going to be eternally grateful for that. And I just wish more people could experience that without, doing away with all like the hedonistic kind of things that they portray as like the apex of what life should be about. And
Yeah.
I don't know, man, it makes me
I
sad.
do want to throw in a caveat, although I'm sure any dinks listening have probably tuned out by this point in the episode, which is fine. I do also think if anybody doesn't want to have children, they shouldn't. Because anyone who doesn't want to have children is probably not going to be the best parent. So,
No, 100%,
because
yeah.
you have to really want it, given all of that stuff. We hit on something that it reminded me of something actually you said earlier too about intangibles and masculinity. Because when you're saying that thing about, God take the wheel, like you would basically sacrifice yourself for your kids if you had to,
Yeah.
or you wouldn't for your dog. Brings up the thought of honor, like honor was the crux of being a man for the longest, ever since humans could socialize, right? Like it's like a man who is physically capable of running away from the barbarians will stay and lay down his life to make sure the women and children survive. And that's why the people continue to exist like that. Consumerism really punishes honor in many cases of like sacrificing things, making your balance sheet suffer for the sake of something intangible, which is a shame. But I also understand when people make that decision, it's like, oh yeah, I understand why you want another 100K in the bank rather than have kids this year, something like that.
No, I'm the thing is, like, and don't get it twisted either. If you're a dink and you're still listening, like, I don't judge. I think it's a very intelligent move. I'm at the point too. It's almost just when you accept your life for what it is and you say, hey, you know what? This is beautiful. And this is something that I'm very fortunate to actually experience in this life. Like, I just wish other people could almost enjoy that, I guess, in a weird way. And if you obviously go about it where it's like, you from a very logical perspective, it makes more sense. Like it does. You're gonna save. I think, if I'm not mistaken. I think like every child will cost you about like $750,000 or something per year. Somebody drew up the numbers, and I kind of laughed. I'm like, well, they're not
Not per
wrong.
year, like
Huh? Or no,
over
not per year,
18
but I
years,
guess like
right?
over a lifetime. Yeah,
Yeah.
18 years. So I'm like, they're not wrong in that. Yeah, it's very pricey. But then again, I'm like, I ask myself this all the time. Sometimes the most beautiful things in life are the most expensive, right? So
Hmm.
it's worth the investment, in my opinion. And when it comes to like sacrificing, I think that's when it comes to life and just being able to get the most out of it, and the things that I think are probably the most enjoyable at the end of the day or most gratifying are the things that you actually fought for, sacrifice the most, right? So if you do, like, and let's change gears a little bit here. Let's say you start a business, right? You dedicate all this time to this business, you dedicate all your energy to this business, and after 3 years of struggling, it finally takes off, man. Now it's flying. And now, after like anywhere from 5 to 10 years, let's say now you're really in the quote unquote like successful kind of range of things. You're killing it, right? Your business is out there, you're doing great. That's a lot more fulfilling, I think, than, having like working somewhere where you don't really want to be, but you make a decent amount of money, per year. Let's say you're making like, I don't know, anywhere from 80 to 150K, right? So technically you're above the median in regards to like wage. And let's say you're quote unquote successful monetarily, but when you built something from scratch, right? And it's coming from like you had nothing for those first 3 years. You were literally eating shit, sacrificing all your time, your energy, all that. And then after the fifth year, you finally break free. Then now you're quote unquote successful, and people look at that. I think it's going to be a lot more gratifying for the guy that built something over the 10 years versus the guy that, was just working as an accountant for 10 years. And again, I don't judge either, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that gratification factor that we get as human beings, I think, especially for men, comes from creating and building things. And I think that's something inescapable, right? And there's honor in that. And I think a lot of people, when they do see somebody work hard in that, like whether we like it or not, like as men, I think there's something subconsciously within us that just respects the guy that went out and built something. Because I'm like, bro, this guy's got a gigantic set of balls, especially
Hmm.
if you're taking that, like that's your life that you're basically gambling with. How much time, if you had gone the conservative route, you could have just made money, saved it, and invested it, you'd be good. But this guy decided to take everything and invest in himself. I think that's massive. And I think when it comes to honor, it's like, yo, as men, maybe that's like our new battlefield in this day and age, where it's like, bro, this guy went out, put it all on the line, and he won. And there's something
Hmm.
beautiful to be said about that. And as far as sacrifice kind of goes, man, like you're sacrificing absolutely everything to see if this thing's going to work. Like, I think it's beautiful. But I also believe that, there's nothing wrong with going the conservative route
Yeah.
either, but
Yeah, those big risks are like the closest thing. Like, men of antiquity had to face death all the time. It's like
yeah,
contemplating about your death was like not really an option. Like I was
it's an
studying some like
afterthought. Yeah.
samurai stuff recently. All the samurai books from the samurai era, like the 1600s, was all about you have to think about your death because you might die. Like you're always carrying a sword on you. Like you, at any moment, you might end up in a sword fight and die. So you better think about it. Whereas, yeah, I mean, we're many degrees away from having to have like a serious sacrifice. I'm just curious though, because I wasn't sure about the figure of like 750K for a kid. So I was actually looking up how much is a Bugatti because I had no idea.
It's
Like
a million bucks, I
the
think.
low
Yeah.
end is 2 million, so that's like
Jeez.
a kid and a half. It's like would you rather have a Bugatti or would you rather have two kids?
I'd
And
rather have two kids. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I mean, my wife is going to cap us at some point, but I would have 8 kids if the money and money and time and all that stuff allowed for it.
I mean, the Bugatti's cool, but if you got nobody to experience it with, really, like, what's it worth? Because the way I kind of see it, and I remember I heard somebody mention that, it's like when you have a Lamborghini, you're just basically renting the coolness of the Lamborghini as like a social credit kind of thing, right? People are going to see
Hmm.
you rolling up the street. They're like, oh man, that guy's cool. He's got a Lamborghini. The moment you step out of it, it's just like, well, he's just a regular guy, or now you got to, floss your Rolex or something, right? And that's just a societal norm that we've created, I guess. And we said, hey, you know what? He drives a really cool car. Therefore, he must be cool. Or, he's got tons of money. Therefore, all the girls want him. And it's almost like that validation. Again, that's that external validation from the things you own, not really from who you are as a person, right? Like, and there's nothing wrong with owning a Bugatti, Lamborghini, whatever, but at the same time, like, what's it worth to you? Like, I told my wife this and my sons, like, we talk about this all the time, right? And they're like, oh, like Lamborghini, Bugatti, this, that, and the other. But I'm like, I'd rather have a car that's big enough for all of us to pile into comfortably, than like a Lamborghini. Like, what are we going to do with Lamborghini? I can take one of you guys around, right? So it's not really worth it.
They're specifically made for single people with the 2 seats.
Yeah.
So I actually want to go back to something because you've been with your wife for a long time.
Yeah.
I'd imagine. So before 22. So it's been like 15 plus years.
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious because when I think of male enhancement, and I haven't really gone down that road too much. I did mess around with jelking in college, but never really stuck with it. Like that wasn't really the crux of my insecurities or pain when it came to even sexuality. So I focused on other things, but I'm curious what motivated you through that, basically being with one woman for 15 plus years. It's not what I imagine. I always imagine guys who are going to like swingers parties who want to have a 10-inch penis or something like that. I'm just curious if you don't mind sharing.
No, man, more than anything, it was kind of like, it was a combination of like, I was seeking the validation of like, I made it, kind of like, okay, like I said, Maximus Aurelius, like, are you not entertained? I'm awesome. So it's almost like that validation from her obviously weighed heavily on my mind. But the other thing too that I noticed, and that's in any aspect of my life, me personally, it's like whenever I start to become successful at something and I gain momentum, I just want to do more of it, right? And honestly, when I first saw like a little bit of gains, I'm like, holy shit, this actually works. I want more. And then I almost got a little bit too aggressive and injured myself a couple times along the way. But, so it's like one thing you do got to be smart about. But the biggest factor for me was just, honestly, it turned into like a hobby almost, because it's something that I would do like after work, and it's almost like a gym routine. Like as soon as I fall into a routine and anything in life, like I start building on it, I see the momentum. It's kind of like anything else. Like let's say you go to the gym, you start building your bench press, and I don't know if you're powerlifting and you start to add more weight. I don't know about you, but I got that addictive personality where it's like, oh snap, like I'm seeing results, I'm seeing gains, like I just want more. And that's the same principle, like I said, that I applied from when I was a kid and I made, muscular gains to like now I'm making gains here, when it comes to male enhancement or, obviously the enlargement side of things. And I mean, I just became addicted to that. Cause like for me,
is that the extreme thing you're saying?
Yeah.
Before?
It's like, I'm just pushing it, like just more and more and more. So I don't know, for me, it wasn't even validation anymore. It was just like, I was just addicted to the thing. And the thing is too, like, I realize this the older I get, it's like when I'm doing something that I like, regardless of like, I'm not really thinking about the end in mind so much. It's just kind of enjoying the journey. And I just started to enjoy the workouts themselves, right? And it's almost like I would get my dopamine fix from, basically getting the exercise in. So I just kind of became addicted to that, man. Like just enjoying the journey. And then psychologically, like it just kind of wired me to like, yo, you got to do this, right? So it's the same as the gym or same as any other routine where I just kind of got in a groove and I just made sure that I just kind of kept going. And then I would just set new goals, right? It's kind of like, okay, I want to work on girth. So I got to, do like the pumping exercise, clamping, whatever the case may be. And then I just started, again, when I started to see results in that regard, I just doubled down, man. I'm like, this is fun, So as far as that kind of goes, like, you're right. It would be more gratifying if I was like a guy that was swinging, I guess, and impressing everybody. But at the end of the day, I think what really got me more than anything was that I was just impressing myself. And that's where I kind of got that validation. I mean, it was internal, man. Like if I was seeking that external validation, I'd be, I don't know, doing porn or something, I guess, just, like, I don't know. I would be seeking it from somewhere else, but eventually it turned into a thing where I just enjoyed it for me. And even to this day, like when I do it, like I don't really think about anybody else. It's just something that I enjoy doing. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like kind of a pure, that's like kind of how an artist a true artist approaches their art or something. It's just, I guess an unexpected place, but I guess it could be any pursuit of mastery if you will. I'm wondering because so one thing that I've been a little bit, I don't know, struggling, pondering is like I used to talk about sexuality and all these like things a lot, like things that I think now if my kids were older, I'd be a little uncomfortable having them see what the type of stuff I used to post about. Not that I did anything
Hmm.
trashy or anything, but like I was speaking about things that maybe I don't want to talk about with my kids when they're old enough.
Yeah.
And your kids are already old enough, so I'm curious if you guys talk about this, if they know what you talk about on your podcast and stuff.
Oh, we'll joke around about it. I mean, the thing is, it's kind of like, I mean, my youngest, that he has no idea, but my oldest, because like he's 12, 13 now, and I'm like, he's chasing after girls and this, that. So I'm just like, we'll joke around about it here and there, but it's almost like non-consequential. Like, I don't
Hmm.
know. We're pretty open about everything, anyways. Like, he was telling me about like the girls that he likes and this, that. So it's, I don't know. I kind of want to take the taboo out of it too, because when it comes to like a lot of men and what I've realized, like for a lot of guys, not so much for myself, but it's the erectile difficulties come from just like one of the biggest ones is obviously too much porn watching for a lot of guys. So I'm open about that with my kid. I'm like, whatever you do, don't watch porn. Like that's absolute garbage. Like you're really not going to gain anything from it, and it's going to fuck up your brain for life. So please do not watch that, right? And the other thing is just like I'm completely transparent with my son about everything else, anyways. So it's like when it comes to this or anything else, like I just make it so he can come and talk to me about whatever it is. Like he'll
Hmm.
ask me like, "Yo, what does cocaine feel like? What is it? What is this like?" And I'm just like, "Oh, you know, this like it's not worth it." And I'm like, "This blah blah blah." I'm like, and by the way, there's fentanyl now. So back in my day, you know, I'm like nowadays people are dying. They're getting slumped like just from I don't know what they're doing, but or the trank I guess is what unfortunately a lot of these people are taking, but I just find that if you're completely transparent with your kids, regardless of what the subject might be, as taboo as it might be, you know, you make it in a way that's approachable. It just becomes kind of funny. You know, we just kind of talk about
Hmm.
it as a joke, but I want to make sure my sons go into the world, you know, hard, ready to go when the time is right, you know, and make sure
Uh-huh.
they're optimized, you know, full performance. But it just kind of comes down to being transparent with them. And I'm transparent with them like in every regard. So this just kind of fell in
Yeah.
line with that. It is kind of funny though when you talk about it. You gotta
Yeah,
laugh.
yeah. When I think about like these common male insecurities, common problems, we create content like this usually to reach a younger. This kind of stuff is usually for like younger men. Like I hope a 16-year-old kid can listen and gain
Hmm.
something and maybe overcome some sort of pain or shame or issue that he can't learn about from his dad or something. So I guess it makes sense that your own children should be like your first
Yeah.
audience in a sense if they want to hear
Yeah.
it. You
Well,
know.
that's just it, because it's kind of like I think it'd be very hypocritical for me. It's kind of like, oh, you know, I want to help other men, but it's like, oh, I don't want to start off at home because you know this is taboo or this is. And I
Hmm.
think when you get rid of that taboo factor too, and that's the other thing where you know I've been talking to other urologists and you know other people that work in the field of helping men. It just if you treat it like I mean I make the joke that it's just like working out the bicep, man. You know, like it really is. The only thing is that obviously it's got different functions and it does different things and there's a lot more factors that tie into you know penile health versus like just your bicep, but at the same time if you just treat it like you're working out a muscle, you know, you take the taboo out of the fact that it's like you know it's your sex tool, it almost like then all that taboo just kind of falls away. And it's cool too because like I'm seeing a lot of urologists that talk about like how if we just kind of talk more about how pumping can be beneficial per se, right? And it'll just help people to have a healthier sex life the older they get because hey, you know what, they're not getting the same nocturnal erections they used to get when they were younger. If we just brought it to the light in a way where it's like it's not really like something dirty or something to be like, oh man, you know, you should have shame around it, don't talk about it, it's your penis. It's kind of like when you take all that away, it's just like, hey, I just want to make sure that I'm optimal the older I get. And the thing is too, it also sheds light on a whole bunch of other issues. Like I remember I forgot who I was talking to where he was telling me, oh no, Dr. Elliot Justin. He's the guy that created FirmTech. And FirmTech's a cock ring that will actually track your nocturnal erections. And those nocturnal erections will actually tell you if you are at risk for heart disease. Because if you have bad nocturnal erections, and let's say you're like 35, like our age, which is something that's like unfortunately happens more often than not, and you don't have erectile difficulties, it's like, hey, you may have some circulatory issues that may need looking, you know, somebody to look at a deeper level just because like your heart's not functioning the way it should be. Like your heart's not pumping the blood that it should be in the right way, which means you have circulatory issues. which means you should probably go see a doctor. And in just doing something like that, you can actually look into the fact that, hey, maybe this guy has like an early signs of heart disease, and we can treat that before it gets any worse, right? So again, when it comes to like your dick health, and the other thing, another one too is like diabetes, right? Like a lot of people will be like, oh, you're not getting blood flow to your extremities, right? So your fingers, your toes. But what they don't realize too, a lot of these guys will be suffering from poor erectile quality, right? And again, if you're able to track that in a way that makes sense, and we just use this as another tool in our toolbox to make sure that men can live optimal lives, and why not? Right. And that's where I think if we just kind of do away with the taboo of, oh, it's your dick, and just kind of look at it as another marker that can tell us your story, I guess, as a man, then we can just use that to our advantage to live a life where you can be fully healthy, right? And optimize our health. So,
Yeah. That's so interesting because, like, the angle that I've always approached sexuality is like it says so much about your inner psychology, right? Like,
yeah,
when I entered this realm, it was because I had psychogenic erectile dysfunction. My
I
body
remember,
was
yeah,
healthy, but like I had all this anxiety, maybe too much cortisol. It was affecting me in that way, which was kind of my entryway into actually a lot of spiritual things too.
yeah,
But this is also very interesting, and I guess I'm at an age now where I should maybe all guys our age should be looking into this too of
yeah,
like, yeah, it does actually say a lot about who you are. And, back to the internal thing, it's like whether people make fun of it or not, whether there's taboos around it, whether bro culture puts like a very not vulnerable, crass spin on it.
hmm,
So much of our self-worth, psychology, identity as men is somehow related to our penis. And that's just how it is,
yeah. Yeah. But you know what the funny thing is it'll be like, if you're talking about it in like a group of guys, and it'll be like, and I'll bring it up, or the case may be, where it's happened multiple occasions where it's just like, oh, you talking about what, man? Psh, I don't need that, man. I'm good. And when everybody leaves, it's like, yo, man, so what was that website you were talking about, man? Like, what was it called? And I'm like, and that's kind of where, again, it's just the insecurity factor. But if you made it something like bodybuilding per se, right? It's kind of like, a guy would just come up to me and be like, bro, I want bigger arms. What do you recommend? Like chin ups good, pull ups, like what should I do? And I'll be like, oh man, chin ups, dips, whatever the case may be. If we had that same approach to it, as in like, hey, you know what, you want to make sure that you're in a good place, sexually, and you want to make sure your dick is functioning as best as it possibly can for longer. It's like, yeah, you probably just jump in, use something like the bath mitt or the exerciser, 10 minutes when you take a shower, man, that's all it takes. And I've had different urologists talk about how pumping can be extremely beneficial, right? But we just don't do it because like, haha, it's a joke, it's oh like, oh, I'm not gonna do that. It's stupid. I don't need it. And it's like, bro, you're 50 pounds overweight. You're already starting to show, a whole bunch of different symptoms for a whole bunch of different diseases. Your diet isn't right. It ties into so many different things, but one of the biggest things that you'll see, oh, again and again, is just the fact that guys will start suffering from erectile difficulties, and that's usually the red flag that triggers them into saying like, okay, something's wrong with me from like a more global perspective when it comes to my body. And then it's like, yeah, your diet sucks. You're eating all this shitty food, you smoke or whatever, or you might do drugs or whatever the case may be. Drinking's huge, man. Like drinking is massively, like drinking beer is probably the most unmasculine thing you can do, like in my opinion, just because of all like the shit that stuff's loaded with, and all the different, oh god, there was a chemical that was shown to have the same estrogenic factors as,
Yeah.
I think it was like BP. Oh god, man, I can't remember off the top of my head. But like you find that in beer, and honestly, like the lifestyle that's sold to us from like a young age, like men drink beer. This, I'm like, no, man, like it's
Yeah.
not a good idea. Like
I don't
purify your
remember the
water.
chemical, but I did see something like specifically hops. So like IPAs,
Yes,
double IPAs, which I've always hated. So I felt a little validated. So I
like
always
it's
think it
worth it.
tastes like urine, but like, a lot of people like that. And that's like the worst thing. Like the something in the hops itself mimics
Yeah,
estrogen in your body.
super estrogenic. Where I'm like, wait a minute, why are we drinking this stuff? And again, that's kind of where I started with just like I want penis enlargement. I just want to make sure I can get bigger, stronger. But then you start to realize that there's all these different factors that play into like making you smaller, having erectile difficulties, poor sexual performance. And that's kind of like, I guess, the yin and yang, kind of the balance, and the things that kind of, I guess, not, I want to say validate, my research, but kind of like just makes me happy. It's like, I'm not crazy. So there's a lot more to it when it comes to like having, your health in an optimal position, and your penis will be a reflection of that, good or bad. right? And it's kind of like you'll see people with like, and again, like you'll see younger men where their penises are atrophying at a faster rate from all these different factors. And, you know, and that ties into that vulnerability piece again, where it's like, who do you really want to talk to about this stuff? Right. So that's kind of why I created the podcast, just for people like, hey, you know what? There's different things that you can do out there. And even if you're a younger dude and you might require TRT just because you got really low test levels, like I don't judge anybody that goes on TRT unless he's going on stage or competing. And then I'm like, hey, bro, get the fuck out of here, because it's like, like I don't like, I'm not a fan of like influencers that are like 18 and are like, I'm on TRT because it's low. I'm like, you don't really need it yet. But, now at my age where I'm at, like 35, and anybody over who might have like, again, who might be suffering from low tests or other hormonal like irregularities, like you should go see a doctor. You should get a panel of work done just to see where you're at. Right. And again, a red flag is you just look at your sexual performance, man. There's other contributing factors, of course, like sleep. And I would honestly go the natural route first. But if you're struggling, then you should definitely talk to somebody. Right. And like, that's the whole purpose of the podcast that I started, was just, I want people to be able to talk about this more openly and basically open their eyes to the fact that, hey, you know what? I'm not limited by these old school beliefs, and that it's not taboo to talk about it. And there's a lot of people out there that can help you, right?
Mm-hmm. Awesome, man. Well, I've been listening to your podcast. I've already learned a lot of things. It's actually kind of inspired me to look into it again. Like, I did joke a little bit in college. My girlfriend at the time did notice something, and then I kind of just went in a different direction because I had other problems going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to learn more about the specifics, techniques, do's and don'ts, they should definitely check out your podcast. And there's other great information as well.
Yeah. No, but I mean, yeah, no, if anybody wants to listen, I mean, we talk about that subject, but lately it's a combination of different things, like more the mental side of things as well. Just because again, like to your point, where a lot of guys might be suffering from erectile difficulties, and it might be something psychological. And a lot of times it's kind of like, hey man, if your brain isn't functioning right, your mind is off, that's going to affect every other aspect of your life. So, hey.
Yeah.
Everything
And
ties in.
sexuality, like looking again, like evolutionarily, it's like a peacock's feathers, right? Like if a peacock is sick, it can't possibly have nice feathers, which is why the feathers are basically its dick size, in that world, right? It's like, I mean, it's not even just about size, but your body wants to share its surplus in sexuality. So it is such a great marker of whether or not you have surplus. Because if you're sick, if you're messed up in the head or in the body,
Yeah.
your body's not going to want to make babies, basically.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, that's why women will always kind of still always look at that dude who's like in shape, looks good. Hey man, chances are his dick probably works pretty well.
Cool, man. Anything else people should check out if they want to learn more from you?
Oh man, just check out the Masculine Health Solutions podcast, masculinehealthsolutions.com. And if you do want to get in shape, that's what I do, fat loss. So, just send me a DM on Instagram is where I'm at more than anything. And just glad to work with people. And honestly, when a lot of my clients obviously have come from the podcast, so they will ask me things, and I'm always down to talk about it too. It's kind of like in our check-in. So again, if you got any questions though, just reach out and I'll send you a DM.
Cool. Are you still competing as a bodybuilder, by the way?
Yeah, dude, just started cutting.
Cool.
Yeah, I got like 4 months. January. The next one's May 11th. So yeah, man, I just started like cutting right now. I think I brought my calories down to 1,800 calories right now. So again, just gonna enjoy cardio, kind of ease into it. The 1,800 calories isn't that hard. When I start digging down to like the 1,200 range, then it gets dirty. But yeah, no, it just started.
Is there last couple questions? I am curious. Like, so you're in an all natural thing. Are there like age categories? Because I'd imagine your tests must be lower than when you were 25.
Well, for me right now, it's kind of like, I think for us, it's pretty much open. So that's like 18 to like 55. And then from 55 on, I think it's the master's class. So that's kind of the older dudes. And then it's just by different divisions. So there's open, then there's amateur or debit, which is like guys that it's like their first time ever doing a bodybuilding show. And then, so yeah, amateur, debit, and then there's open, and then there's master class. And then, so right now I'm in the open, so we're competing with guys that are anywhere from 18 to like 55, but usually it's like 18 to 40. Probably.
Can you get as big as when you were 25?
You know what, man? When I was 25, all I was doing was bulking. So
okay,
the thing is, there's other contributing fact. I think the biggest one for me is just sleep. If I slept more, I think I'd probably be able to get to where I was when I was 25. But I do feel like it was easier for me to put on the muscle mass at 20, or it was easier for me to recover at 25. A
Yeah.
lot easier. But now I do feel like, yo, man, I got these, I'm not going to say old man joints, but I do feel a little bit more pain in my knee from like recovery and stuff. So I'm just like, okay, it takes a little bit longer, and I got different healing modalities that I kind of got to take into consideration that I didn't really pay attention to before.
I've been really frustrated with that it takes like more than twice as long to recover compared to some time ago. Like I just really messed up my shoulder I was just trying to PR and dips. I wasn't even trying to do anything too crazy, but like I can't press anything. Anyway, this is a whole other thing. Not ready for TRT. I don't know if I would do that, but yeah.
Well, I mean, there's stem cell therapy that you could look into. I just talked to a doctor about that, and I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. And I
was messing with peptides, actually. I can't get them. I'm in Peru right now, but I was taking BPC 157, and that seemed to help. And then I was taking a growth hormone precursor I forget the name of it actually, but it really, it was like I was in my 20s again, as far as recovery. It was great.
Jeez.
But
I mean, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, when I get out of like maybe bodybuilding, natural bodybuilding, I think maybe like in my 50s, I'll probably start like messing around with, well, I don't know, man. I think about it a lot. I think the peptides, it's more of a precursor. It's not like an actual hormone, right? So it's like, technically, I don't know where that really falls in our league, right? So, because if it's legit and it's like I can just take it, I'm like, well, you know what? I don't mind. But I think peptides are illegal, so are SARMs.
I would imagine they are.
Yeah, so
because like the effect, especially the ones, anything that gives you a really like sharp effect, I'm sure.
Anyways. Oh yeah. I mean, if I was an Olympic athlete, I'd just hire a good doctor, and I'm like, let's go.
Cool, man. Well, it's fun talking to you again. Let's stay in touch for sure.
100%, man. Definitely. Talk to you next time, bro.
Take it easy.
All right, bye.